For those of you who haven't been coming regularly, each month I've been talking about one paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Who Am I? This is the 7th paragraph. Before talking about this paragraph, I'd just like to clarify about one word, that is the self or whatever. In most English books on Bhagavan's teachings, we often see the term the self, with the definite article the and a capital S. There is actually no such term in Sanskrit or Tamil or any Indian language, because in Tamil and Sanskrit there are no definite articles like the, and there are no capital letters. The problem in English, when we firstly when we say the self, whether with a big S or a small s, we are objectifying or reifying self, which is a fundamental error which we need to avoid. The other problem is, if we use the capital S, we are then distinguishing a small self from a big self. Obviously there is only one self, but there is what we actually are, our real nature, and there is what we seem to be. What we seem to be is the ego. What we actually are is our real nature. So it's not always appropriate to distinguish these. For example, in the term Atma-vichara, what is the self we're investigating? When people ask Bhagavan, he said it's the ego. The reason he said that is very simple. If, for example, we are walking with Bhagavan on a path at the foot of the hill in the dark or in very dim light, we see something lying on the ground and we think it's a snake. Bhagavan sees it clearly, but it's just a rope. So we're afraid, Bhagavan is not afraid. So seeing our fear, Bhagavan says it's not a snake, it's just a rope. But to us it looks like a snake, so we're still afraid to go near it. So Bhagavan then says, look at it carefully and see. And then if we ask Bhagavan, which should I look at? Should I look at the rope or at the snake? Bhagavan says, look at the snake. Why he says look at the snake? Because to us it looks like a snake. Not that the snake and the rope are two different things, but because in our view it seems to be a snake, Bhagavan says look at the snake. So when Bhagavan says in Atma-vichara, it is the ego we're investigating, it is because we now experience ourselves as ego. Ego is what we now seem to be. So we cannot investigate and discover our real nature except by attending to what we now seem to be, this ego. But actually, when we look carefully at the snake, what are we actually looking at? We're actually looking only at the rope. So when we're attending to ego, what we're actually attending to is our real nature, albeit at present mixed with adjuncts. The more keenly we attend to it, the more the adjuncts drop off, and our real nature alone remains. By using this capital S and small s, we are creating a false duality, as if there are two selves. So that's a problem with using this term the self in English. In Tamil, the term Bhagavan generally used when referring to the term that is usually translated as the self is Nāṉ. Nāṉ is a simple generic pronoun. Basic meaning is one or oneself. Like we use we use one as a generic pronoun in English. In Tamil, its use is slightly different to oneself, because in English, when one says oneself, one is usually referring to the first person, whereas in Tamil, Nāṉ usually refers to first person, but in certain contexts it can refer to a third person, or even a second person sometimes. So it can sometimes mean it or he or she. But generally, when Bhagavan is, in the context in which Bhagavan is using it, he's using it just to mean oneself. It doesn't distinguish ego from our real nature. It's just oneself in a general sense. Sometimes Bhagavan will clarify, like in the fourth paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, in one sentence he uses the term tān, meaning oneself, and in the next sentence he says tān embadu ātma-sorūpa, which means oneself, referring to oneself in that particular context. What is called oneself is ātma-sorūpa. Ātma-sorūpa means the real nature of oneself. But doesn't always mean that, but in that particular context it means that. So usually the term Bhagavan used was tān. He also sometimes used the Sanskrit term atma, or in Tamil it's often becomes, because the sound atma is not a very natural sound in Tamil, it's usually, Bhagavan would write it as anma. That's the Tamil equivalent. Atma in Sanskrit means much the same as tān in Tamil. Basic meaning is oneself. But it's got a different etymology. Originally, I think it meant breath or life, so it's got a different etymology, a different history behind the word. But generally, the way Atma is used in Sanskrit usually means oneself. In Tamil, when Bhagavan uses Atma, it means oneself in a spiritual sense. In fact, in some contexts, we can translate the word Atma as spirit, because it's used in the same sense as we use the English word spirit. And the Sanskrit equivalent of spiritual or spirituality is atmika. So the Sanskrit word atma has a spiritual connotation, though it's often used in a much more general sense. But in Tamil, when Bhagavan uses the term atma, because it's a term which is not used in normal spoken Tamil, but more in a spiritual or religious context, it means either the soul or the mind or one's real nature. It doesn't define whether it's the ego or one's real nature. Like in Atma-vichara, does it refer to ego or to our real nature? We can interpret it either way. It applies both ways. But generally, when Bhagavan uses the term Atma in Tamil, he's usually referring to our real nature, but not always. But when Bhagavan wants to distinguish and refer to our real nature, the term he generally used was either svarūpa or ātma-svarūpa. Svarūpa literally means own form. Swa means one's own, and rupa is form. So the literal meaning of svarūpa is one's own form. But generally it means nature. It's used in the sense of nature. So generally we can translate svarūpa as one's real nature. Sometimes svarūpa is also used referring to the nature of something. Like in one sentence he says, manatin sorūpam nineveh. That means the nature of the mind is only thought. But when he uses svarūpa not attached to any other word, he's referring to our real nature. Or when he wants to be still more specific, when he wants to emphasize that it's our real nature, he uses the compound term ātma-sorūpa, which means the real nature of oneself. Or very literally the own form of oneself, but it implies the real nature of oneself. So these are the terms. So when Bhagavan particularly wanted to distinguish our real nature from what we seem to be, from the ego, the term he would use would either be svarūpa or ātma-sorūpa. But in English, this term, the self, is used very often not only as a translation of svarūpa or ātma-sorūpa, but often as a translation of atma or tān. And often inappropriately, like particularly in uḷḷadu, where Bhagavan uses the word tān a lot, it's often been inappropriately translated as the self with a capital S, when Bhagavan is actually referring either to ourself in a general sense, without distinguishing ego and our real nature, and sometimes he's using it particularly referring to the ego. So by translating it as the self with a capital S, it's actually it's a misinterpretation. As I say, in English, when we use the term the self, we are reifying it. We are making it as if it's an object. We're objectifying it. This is a problem which is particularly there in English translations of not only Bhagavan's teachings, but all Advaitic texts. Like if you pick up any translation of the Upanishads or Bhagavad Gita, generally Atma is translated as the self. With a capital S, which is creating a false duality and is objectifying our what we actually are, or what we seem to be, depending on the context. Because in Sanskrit, because this confusion about the term Atma is a very, very ancient confusion in Indian philosophy, and it's why this the Buddhists tried to distinguish themselves by saying, but Buddha taught that there's no Atma. That is not actually what Buddha taught, but that is how it's interpreted by not all Buddhists, but by many Buddhists. The earliest Buddhist records are the Pali texts, and in the Pali texts, such as Dharmapada and other or Dhammapada, I think it is, and other Pali texts, one saying that occurs quite often is, in Pali, it is Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. That's the Pali equivalent. In Sanskrit, it would be Sarva Dharma Anatma. That means all dharmas are not self, are not oneself. Dharma there refers to all phenomena, because that's what all things that are dharma come from a root dru, which means to hold. So things that are held together or upheld, that's all phenomena, all constructed things, all things that appear, they're all not oneself. Buddha is not saying there is no self, he's just saying no phenomena is ourself. Bhagavan would agree. Nothing that appears is ourself, because we are there whether things appear or they don't appear. We are present in waking and dream when phenomena appear. We're also present and aware of our existence in sleep when no phenomena appears. So no phenomena can be what we actually are. Now we mistake ourselves to be this body. This body is a phenomena that appears in waking. In dream, some other body appears and it seems to be ourselves at that time. But neither of these phenomena can be ourselves, because we're aware of ourselves in the absence of these phenomena. If this body were what we actually are, we couldn't be aware of ourselves without being aware of this body. But in dream, we're aware of ourselves without being aware of this body, but then we're aware of ourselves as if we were some other body. So we cannot be either that dream body or this body. In sleep, we're aware of ourselves without being aware of any body at all. So no body can be what we actually are. So what Buddha said is no phenomena all phenomena are not oneself. That's what an atma means, not oneself. In Pali, it's anatta. So if we understand atma there as oneself, there's no confusion. But because people, from ancient times, people have been reifying this word, this term atma, many Buddhists have interpreted that, and even many Advaitins also make the same confusion. They reify atma, and then they have a dispute about whether there is atma or no atma. This is a meaningless dispute, because if we say there's no atma, that is amounts to saying there is nothing. Because all atma means is oneself or itself. Everything is itself. A thing and itself are not two different things. They're not two things here. The table and itself. The table is itself. I am myself. You are yourself. So self is it's not an object. It's not a thing other than that of which it is the self. So the Advaita philosophy is there is only one self. That means there's only one thing that actually exists. That is what Bhagavan is, that brings us to the subject that Bhagavan is talking about here. In the first sentence here, of the 7th paragraph, he says, yathārtham-āy uḷḷadu, ātma-sorūpam oṉṭṛē. Yathārtham means what is real, actual, or true. So yathārtham-āy means actually. Uḷḷadu means what exists, that which is, what is. So what actually exists, or what actually is, ātma-sorūpam oṇṭṛē. Atma-sorūpam, as I explained, means the real nature of oneself. Oṇṭṛē means one. oṇṭṛē is is an intensified form of one. It's a very emphatic way of saying only. So what Bhagavan says in this sentence is, what actually exists is only the real nature of oneself. So since the real nature, Atma-svarūpa alone is what actually exists, everything else that seems to exist cannot be other than that. If there is only a rope, the snake or any other phenomenon that appears has to be just the rope, because the rope is the only thing that is there. One person may see it as a snake, another person may see it as some water, another person may see it as some oil. It could be seen as many things, but actually it's only one thing, it's only a rope. So all these manifold phenomena that appear, they are actually only our own real nature. And that is the implication of this sentence. So our real nature, or oneself, ourself, Atman, is not something separate. It is what we actually are, and it is what everything actually is, because there's nothing other than that. So in the first sentence, I say, Bhagavan says very emphatically, what actually exists is only Atma-sorūpa. But we see so many other things we can object. Then Bhagavan answers that obvious doubt that people will have in the next sentence. Jaga-jīva-īśvarargaḻ, śippiyil veḷļi adil kalpanaigaḻ. Jaga means world, Jiva means soul, the ego. Īśvara means God. Īśvaraṇ, it's all one compound word. Jaga-jīva-īśvarargaḻ. Gal is a plural ending, but the reason Bhagavan isn't talking about many gods here, but it's plural because it's a compound word. These are it refers to three things. So these three things, the world, soul, and God, are kaṛpaṉaigaḻ. Kaṛpaṉaigaḻ is, again, it's a plural noun. Kaṛpaṇai is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word karpana, which means something that is fabricated or imagined, a mental creation, an illusion, an illusory superimposition. So everything is just a mental fabrication. God, world, and soul are all a mental fabrication. Adil means in it. That means in Atma-sorūpa. Śippiyil veḷļi. Śippiyil means in a shell. It's referring to mother of pearl, but the term is just shell. So like veḷļi means silver. So like silver in a shell, there's no silver actually in the shell. There seems to be silver in the shell, but actually all it is just a shell. There's no silver there. If we crush the shell, we can't melt silver out of it. There's no actual silver there. It's just an illusory appearance. Likewise, the world, soul, and God are just illusory appearances. They're just mental fabrications of the mind, or more precisely, fabrications of the ego. Because as Bhagavan clarifies elsewhere, when the ego comes into existence, everything else comes into existence. When the ego doesn't exist, nothing else exists. So all this world, soul, and God these are phenomena that seem to exist only in the view of the ego, who is the jiva, which is itself a false appearance. So when Bhagavan says these are all just a fabrication, implying an illusory fabrication, in whose view does this fabrication exist? Elsewhere Bhagavan has clarified, only in the view of the jiva, the ego. It's only when we rise as I am so-and-so, I am Michael, or I am whoever, that is the name we give, that is given to ourselves, is a name given to this body. So when I say I am Michael, it is because I experience myself as this body. I am aware of myself as I am sitting here, I'm not there, I'm just in this place, because I've limited myself. My self-awareness is now limited to this body. That is what ego is, or jiva. Is nothing but that limited and therefore distorted form of self-awareness. Then in the next sentence, Bhagavan says, ivai mūṇḍṛum, ēka-kālattil tōṇḍṛi, ēka-kālattil maṟaigiṉḍṛaṉa. Which literally means, ivai mūṇḍṛum means all these three or all these three. But on the end of mūṇḍṛum means three, mūṇḍṛum implies all of them. So these three or all these three, ēka-kālattil means in one time or simultaneously, tōṇḍṛi appearing, ēka-kālattil again simultaneously in one time, they disappear. So they appear and disappear simultaneously. In sleep, there's no ego, therefore there's no world and no God. As soon as the ego rises in either waking or dream, a world appears, and therefore, to explain how the world is ordered and everything, we have a God there. Well, the term God is a very broad concept, which means different, which is understood differently by different people and has different implications in different contexts. But generally, most people, unless they choose to be atheists, most people believe that there's something behind the appearance of all these things. Most of us, well, I think all of us here, we're here because we don't think that there's only physical things exist. In fact, it's obvious not only physical things exist, because we're aware of our existence in sleep when no physical things exist, or at least in our view, no physical things exist. It's as soon as we limit ourselves as this little body, our real nature is unlimited. So we can, one way of explaining the concept of God is, as soon as we limit ourselves as something finite, our real nature is infinite. When we seemingly limit ourselves as something finite, the remaining infinite part of ourselves then seems to be something other than ourselves, and that is what we take to be God. And we then form so many beliefs about God. He's created this world, he's punishing bad people, he's rewarding good people, he bestows his grace so that we can go return to him and merge back in him. So many ideas we have about God. But all these ideas arise only because we've limited ourselves. If we hadn't risen as this ego, thereby limiting ourselves as a body, we would be the infinite whole, because what actually exists is only our real nature. We alone actually exist. Since we actually exist, there are no limits on our existence, so we're infinite. Since we're infinite, there's nothing other than us. But once we limit ourselves, our real nature then appears outwardly as if an all-loving, all-knowing, all-gracious, all-powerful God. Then those are the first three sentences we've dealt with. Then there are three short sentences in which Bhagavan says, So here, whereas in the first sentence he referred to our real nature as ātma-sorūpa, here he refers to it more briefly as svarūpa. What he refers to here as svarūpa is what he refers to in the first sentence as ātma-sorūpa. So sorūpam-ē jagam. The letter A on the end of it is an intensifier which implies alone. So svarūpa, our real nature, alone is the world. Sorūpam-ē jagam. Sorūpam-ē Nāṉ. Our real nature alone is I. Here I is referring to the ego or soul. Sorūpam-ē īśvaraṉ. Our real nature alone is God. And then in the final sentence he says, ellām śiva-svarūpam. Again, śiva-svarūpam refers again to Atma-sorūpa, but Shiva for Shaivites, for Hindus who worship Shiva, Shiva is the highest of the highest. He's even beyond God. Shiva is equivalent of Brahman for the Shaivites. So Śiva-svarūpa means the same as Brahma-svarūpa, which means the infinite real nature. In other words, it's the same as Atma-sorūpa. So everything is only Atma-sorūpa, is Bhagavan's conclusion here. Atma-sorūpa alone exists. Everything else is just a fabrication, and therefore everything is only Atma-sorūpa. Saying everything is the Atma-sorūpa is like saying the snake is a rope. It's true to say that the snake is a rope. It is not true to say that the rope is a snake. When Bhagavan says sorūpam-ē jagam, sorūpam-ē Nāṉ, sorūpam-ē īśvaraṉ, we shouldn't take it to mean that the world is what is. Our real nature is what appears as the world, is what is implied there. Though he says our real nature is the world, it's like saying a rope is the snake. It doesn't mean that the rope is actually a snake, but the rope is what appears as a snake. So here Bhagavan, it's a very brief paragraph. It's a very, very important paragraph because Bhagavan is giving the very heart, this is the heart of the metaphysical side of Bhagavan's teaching. What actually exists is only our real nature. And elsewhere he explains how other things seem to exist. It's only because we rise as an ego that all these other things seem to exist. When we rise as an ego, we limit ourselves as a form of a body. Therefore, there are so many other forms which seem to be other than ourselves. This is the first person, and all the the ego, is the first person. Everything else is second and third persons. I is the subject. Everything else is objects. So this duality of subject and object, of perceiver and perceived, arises only because we arise as ego. When we merge back into Atma-sorūpa, into our real nature, as we do every night in sleep, what remains? Only self-awareness, nothing else, no phenomena. So I hope that's an adequate, rather lengthy but adequate explanation of this short but very important paragraph.
Okay, so my question is about ego, and deep in my soul, yes, I know that what Bhagavan is teaching is the reality. Why is it so difficult to stay in that position? Because when you meditate, you have the moments you are in there, and you know that's a real thing. But then you come back, like the ego comes back. It's like a continuous fight between the reality and the reality that the ego is making. And even one more thing, that I feel like the ego has different kind of personalities. It's like a good ego and bad ego, and so there's like a continuous fighting.
Well, the truth is, it's not a fight between ego and reality, nor is it a fight between different personalities of ego. The fight is between different desires of the ego. According to Bhagavan, knowing ourselves is extremely easy. There can be nothing easier than knowing oneself. But we all disagree with Bhagavan on that, because to us it seems to be very difficult. Okay, we may accept, Bhagavan has said it's easy, it must be easy. Why does it seem so difficult to us? Because we don't want it, or we don't want it enough. We say we want it, but we also want so many other things also. We need to give up our desire for all other things. That is why during the practice we are constantly making a choice. Every time a thought arises, and a thought doesn't mean only the words that seem to go on in our head. According to Bhagavan, all this is thoughts. All phenomena are only thoughts. So as soon as our attention gets drawn towards any phenomena, anything other than ourselves, we have a choice. Either we let our attention continue to go outwards, or we turn it back towards ourselves, the one who is aware of the thought or phenomena. That is a choice we have at every moment. Generally, we're making the wrong choice and we allow our attention to go out towards other things. Every time we make the right choice to try and turn back within, we are weakening that propensity to go outwards. That propensity to go outwards is what is called Vishaya Vasana. Vishaya means phenomena. Vasana means a propensity. That the liking to be aware of phenomena is a Vishaya Vasana. So every time we turn our attention back towards ourselves, we are weakening the intensity and the momentum and the impetus with which we go out. That is why Bhagavan said, by persistent practice, doesn't matter how many Vishaya Vasanas are there, and from what ancient times they may come, if we persevere in trying to turn our attention back towards ourselves, it is possible to destroy all these vasanas. But these vasanas will remain. Maybe we can weaken them, but they will remain until their root is destroyed. If you cut the leaves and branches, even the trunk of a tree, what will happen? If you leave the root there, it will again sprout. Exactly the same with the ego. The ego is the root of all these things. And vasanas, people sometimes talk about vasanas as if they're something other than ourselves, but whose vasanas are they? There are vasanas, our desires. It's not the desires don't come and force themselves on us. It's we who desire that. So if the ego is the root of all these vasanas, it's the ego's desires. So to get rid of, there's no such thing as a totally desireless ego, because as soon as we limit ourselves as a body, we are the one infinite whole. When we limit ourselves as the body, we see ourselves as so many other things. We want to have everything for ourselves. We want all the wealth in the world, all the power in the world, all the pleasures in the world, not all the nasty things. This duality comes into existence as soon as we rise as ego. So we cannot be completely free of desire so long as the ego survives. In Buddhism, they say the root of all problems is desire. Bhagavan says, for whom is desire? It's for the ego. So the root of the root, so to speak, is the ultimate root is the ego. So the ego is the ultimate culprit. We need to eradicate the ego. We need to cut it at its root. But how to cut it at its root? If you've got a very dense bush, you can't see the trunk, let alone the root of it. So first you do have to cut a lot of the leaves and branches in order to expose the root. Likewise, we need to a great extent to weaken the Vishaya Vasanas before we stand a chance of cutting at the root. But the most effective way, there are many ways to weaken Vishaya Vasanas. This weakening of Vishaya Vasanas is what is called the purification of the mind. The impurities of the mind are its outward going tendencies, its Vishaya-vasanas. So the more we weaken the Vishaya-vasanas, the more pure the mind becomes. There are various ways to purify the mind. In Upadesundaya, Bhagavan says, all karma, the karma, when the fruit of a karma is experienced, it still remains as a seed, which casts us into an ocean of action. Because what drives us to do any action, it's our desire to experience certain things. We want to eat a bar of chocolate, so we go to a shop and buy a bar of chocolate. We don't have enough money, so we go and work for it, so we can have enough money to buy a bar of chocolate whenever we want it. So all actions are driven by our desire. So the propensity to act, karma vasanas, are driven by our Vishaya vasanas. It's because we want to experience things, but we do actions to experience them. So in a way, the karma vasanas are just the result of our Vishaya vasanas, or the part and parcel of our Vishaya vasanas. Because of these seeds, because we have this desire to do actions again and again to experience all the pleasures we want to experience, karma is self-perpetuating. That's why Bhagavan says it casts us into an ocean of action. But he gives, in the third verse of Upadesundaya, he gives a way out. He says, he concludes the second verse by saying it casts us into the ocean of action, and therefore it does not give liberation. Vidu tarilai, Bhagavan says in Tamil, which means it doesn't give liberation. In the Sanskrit version, Bhagavan says gati nirodhikam, means it obstructs liberation. That is, doing action is obstructing. But in the third verse he says, however, if action is done for the love of God and without desire for its fruit, that is, the words he uses in Tamil are, action done for God, nishkamya. Nishkamya means without desire for the result. So if you act only for the love of God, without expecting any reward for it, that is nishkarmiya karma. We cannot do perfect nishkarmiya karma so long as there is the ego, because we do have desires. That's why Bhagavan sometimes said, only an atmajnani can be a perfect karma yogi. But we can, at least to some extent, we can try to act just for the love of God. Our destiny has given us a family, responsibilities, all these things. We have to do all these actions. Okay, we do them, but we do it only for the love of God. If we have that sort of attitude, but those actions will purify our mind. And Bhagavan specifies there are three types of actions which can purify the mind. Actions by body, by speech, and by mind. Actions done by body, which are done without desire and for the love of God, are puja. That's worship. Actions done by speech, which are done for the love of God, is usually it's called japa. That's repeating a name of God, or repeating some prayer or whatever. If you're doing it because you want to get a promotion in your job, or you want to pass some exam, or you want more wealth or something, that is not nishkarmiya karma. If you're doing it without any ulterior motive, but just for the love of God, that will purify your mind. And if you do mental action, if you meditate on a name or form of God, not for anything you want to get from God, but for the love of God himself, that will also purify your mind. Because that is weakening the outward going tendencies and just focusing on the love of God. But even God is outside, it seems. So in the 8th verse, after describing puja, japa and dhyana, Bhagavan says, better than anya bhava, which is meditating on God as if he were someone other than ourselves, ananya bhava, that is, in which he is considered to be I, in which he is I. That is, if you understand that God is what is shining in you as I, and therefore turn your attention back to yourself, ananya bhava means meditation on what is not other. What is not other than ourselves? Only ourselves. Why do we meditate on ourselves? Because he is I. The God we have so much love for is what is always shining in our heart as eye. His real form is not is not Jesus or Buddha or Rama or Krishna or any other form. His real form is what is always shining in us as eye, a pure self-awareness. That is the real form of God. So if we understand that and turn our attention within, that, Bhagavan says, is anatinam-uttamam. Anatinam-uttamam means it's the best of all. In what sense is it the best? All these others, in the earlier verses, he was describing better than the puja is japa, better than the japa is dhyana. When he says better, he means more effective in purifying the mind. Because more subtle action, the impurities in the mind are the vasanas, which are very subtle. So the more subtle the action, the more it will purify the mind. So we can be engaged in action for the love of God, but still thinking about so many other things. So our puja, we may be worshipping God, but thinking about other matters. But japa, there's less chance for that. Dhyana, we know whether we're meditating on God or meditating on something else. So it's more and more focused, and more it's action at a subtler level. But when we turn our attention back towards ourselves, that is not an action at all. Because action is, when our attention moves away from ourselves towards anything else, that is an action. When our attention turns back towards ourselves, the rising ego subsides. So turning our attention towards ourselves is not an action, but a subsidence of action. So it results in the state of being, which is our real nature. So the most purifying of all practices is the practice of Atma-vichara. There are other means to purify the mind, but they can only purify the mind to a certain extent. Atma-vichara alone is the most effective, but it's the quickest way to purify our mind, because it's very direct. Either we have a choice every moment. Do we attend to phenomena, or do we attend to ourselves, who's aware of phenomena? We have that choice at every moment. Every moment that we choose to attend to ourselves, or at least try to attend to ourselves, we are directly weakening that outward going tendency. We're not replacing. If we meditate on God, for example, we're replacing our tendency to think of many things with a tendency to think of God. So our love is becoming more one-pointed. Our mind is being purified, but it's still being directed away from ourselves. That's why turning our attention back towards ourselves, that is the best way of meditating on God. That is the most purifying action. So as the mind becomes more and more pure by all these practices, and ultimately by the practice of Atma-vichara, the outward going tendencies become weaker, and the love to attend to ourselves becomes stronger. And in that sense it becomes easier. But though it actually becomes easier to turn our attention within, we're able to go deeper within as our Vishaya vasanas get weakened, it doesn't necessarily seem to be easier. In fact, sometimes it seems to be more difficult, because Sadhguru gave a very nice analogy. If you see a crescent moon, can you see any craters in it? No. When it's a half moon, we can begin to see the craters a little, but not only vaguely. When it's a full moon, the craters are very, very clear. So also, when the mind is impure, it's not aware of its own impurities. There have been some terrible people. There have been Hitlers, there have been Stalins, there have been Genghis Khans, there have been so many, even nowadays, there are so many people who are absolutely heartless. They don't care for anyone else, they only care for themselves. Such people, they don't feel they're doing any wrong. No, I'm stronger than everyone else. I'm right in doing what I'm doing, because so everyone feels they're right. Only as the mind becomes more and more pure, we become more and more painfully aware of the impurities in the mind. Which is why, if you read the devotional songs of great saints, and Bhagavan has given us a sample of those in his hymns to our natural life. Though Bhagavan had already was already one with Arunachala, because he had been through that, as Venkataraman, he had been through that process. He knew the whole process. He knew how it is. So, and he knew the anguish and the yearning that is there as the mind becomes purer and purer. So he expressed all that in his hymns for our sake. But in such hymns, in such songs, we can see how Bhagavan says, I'm worse than a dog. How can I, who am worse than a dog, seek you and attain you? Bhagavan has already merged in Arunachala, but he's expressing there the feeling that is there when we come very close to merging. We feel ourselves to be worse than a dog. That means we feel ourselves to be the lowest of the low. Because of the purity of our mind, we are able to see how impure our mind still is. So we are more clearly aware of the impurities. And we are more painfully aware every time we try to attend to ourselves and our attention is drawn outside. It's again, we feel the pain of separation. We're being wrenched away from ourselves. So it actually, though we're able to go deeper and deeper within, it seems to be more and more difficult as our mind gets purer and purer. But actually we're getting closer and closer there.
Okay, thank you very much.
So it will never seem easy until the ego is completely dissolved. And when the ego is completely dissolved, we won't even feel we struggled, because there never was an ego to struggle. Murugan says in his verses, I didn't do anything, Bhagavan just came and gave it to me. It doesn't mean he didn't do anything. That is the ego that was there. Bhagavan even said about himself, not directly, but by implication, he said, those who attain seemingly without any effort in this life are those who have struggled in previous lives. Bhagavan said, this is not anyone's birthright. Nobody succeeds in this path without perseverance. But when the ego is finally dissolved, when we see there was never any ego at all, then there wasn't anyone who ever did any sadhana. So whatever is attained, it's not even attained because it's always ours, but in a poetic way, Murugan has said, I didn't do anything. Bhagavan just gave it all to me. What did Bhagavan give? He gave him himself, which he was already himself. So, but poets have a license to say these things.
I have a feeling like it's in there, very near, yeah. but it's so far away anyhow. Yes. It's like you can touch it, but it's like a million miles away at the same time.
Because we still have so many desires to experience other things. If we had no desire to experience anything else, it would be very easy. But because we still have a liking, we still care about food, clothing, shelter, at least the basic necessities of life, we still care about, don't we? So long as we care about these things, these draw our mind outwards, and so it seems difficult to turn within. But as we go deeper and deeper in this path, well, it's like a snowballing process. Snowball starts very slowly, but as it picks up more and more snow, it picks up momentum, and it...
Okay, thank you.
Right.
My question is perhaps slightly more practical. I have a 6-year-old, and it's been a year that he asks questions about God and death and things like this. So, how do we communicate with a child growing up in the modern world, surrounded by those who believe that God is outside ourselves and there's sins and there's rewards, there's hell and there's heaven that is not in this life? How do we answer those questions of children, coming from children who are pure themselves, without showing separation between us and them, and without showing discompassion?
there's no simple answer to this. It's according to I mean, whether we're being asked questions by a child or by an adult, we have to give answers that are appropriate to that person at that level. So sometimes children maybe have purer minds than adults. Children may be able to understand deeper things than adults can understand. Just because someone is a child doesn't mean that they're not able to grasp these things. So we have to, no simple answer can be given. I mean, no simple answer can be given to the question of what should you say, because it depends on what of the questions being asked, where the child is or the adult is coming from, and so you just have to feel what is the appropriate answer for your child at the stage they are at. How much? I mean, not all children of that age will ask questions of these things. Some children are only interested in computer games and these things. The very fact that the child is asking about these things shows that there's, well, it's a good sign, but there's some curiosity, but there's something beyond this material life. So you can, I mean, once we've come to Bhagavan's teachings, this is the ultimate. I mean, there are so many religious beliefs people have, and they're appropriate to people at different levels of spiritual development. But this is the ultimate. We've now come to the ultimate. We're now in the PhD class, so to speak. Whereas a lot of what goes on in temples and mosques and churches and synagogues and everything, a lot of it is just kindergarten stuff. I mean, why people go to the mosques or the churches or the synagogues or temples, they go there to ask God for this and that. So that's all very elementary. So you just have to feel what is appropriate for your child, what to say. Most of us are brought up, unless we were brought up in an atheist society and an atheist family, most of us are brought up to have some sort of idea about God. And that is a good starting point for many people. Because God, not everyone is immediately ready to understand, but our real nature is the ultimate reality. Even a child can sometimes understand that. It depends how you have to feel, you have to give answers and see what response you get, see what the child is grasping. So it is, as I say, you feel your way. The same in the spiritual path. We're feeling our way. Bhagavan is there guiding us, but for us, we're still stumbling in the dark. Now, fortunately, because Bhagavan has told us, the light is within you, turn within to see the light, we now have a proper direction to go in. But not everyone is ready to accept that that is the direction. So you have to feel how much the child is able to grasp. Say a little bit about Bhagavan's teaching. If a child is curious to know more, ask more questions, go on in that line. If a child is not so interested in that, more interested in God or angels or whatever it may be.
Or Santa.
Or whatever, yes. So, yeah, it has to be appropriate. But death, you mentioned not only God, you mentioned death. Death is a problem, whether we are theists, atheists, whatever may be our beliefs. Death is a problem for all of us, because we all know one day this body is going to die. And in our society nowadays, we don't talk about death so much. Death is a bit of a taboo subject. It's a subject most people prefer not to talk about, not to think about. And most people will consider it inappropriate to talk to children about death. But in most societies, children see death. Because people, in most traditional societies, people live in joint families. which means they're people of all ages. Babies are being born, grandparents are dying, or great-grandparents are dying. Children see it. And it's not we're not necessarily doing a favor to a child by hiding death from them. Because we're all going to die one day, and death helps us to see life in proportion. Because we're all going out trying to accumulate wealth, or so many things, social status, wealth, possessions, all these things. Like the general way most of us live in this world. But when we think about death, what is the use of, if I earn $1 billion, what good is that going to do for me when I may be able to receive better medical attention, but even the best doctors in the world cannot avert death when it comes. So all my billions, I'm not going to take a penny of it with me. So what is the point? It helps us to, death, if we want to cultivate vairagya, that is, if we want to free ourselves from all these desires, but it's natural for us to have, or at least if we want to weaken the intensity of these outward going desires, it's good to remember about death. Remember, this life is a transient thing. So even for a child, sometimes to talk to a child about death is not a bad thing. Though many people say, oh, no, you shouldn't talk to about child. But why to hide the truth from a child? So, but some children may not want to talk about death. They may be frightened talking about death. We need not force it upon them, but we should see what they're receptive to. And many children, particularly because of the way our society works nowadays, many children don't see death. Their grandparents may die, but they'll die in hospital or in a hospice or in some care home or something. It's not in the house with their grandparents. Sometimes it is, but in most families, grandparents aren't living with because we live in the small little nuclear families instead of extended families, as it was traditionally the case in most societies.
The term Atma-sorūpa,
yes,
is synonymous with Brahman or Atman.
Well, Atma by itself means oneself, generally. So Atma can refer to ego, it can refer to our real nature, it just means oneself. What our real nature is Brahman. So Atma-sorūpa means the real nature of ourself, that is Brahman. What we actually are is Brahman. But what we now seem to be is a person. It's not correct to say, Michael is not Brahman. If I take myself to be Michael, as Michael, I am not Brahman. But what I actually am is Brahman. If I remove Michael, the I am but remains, that is Brahman. So our real nature is Brahman. So the real nature of oneself is Brahman. What we seem to be, the term Atma is also used to mean Jivatma, the individual soul. The Jivatma, it's even said in Sanskrit, Jiva Brahma Aikya, that is the oneness of Jiva and Brahman. That doesn't mean Jiva as Jiva is Brahman, but the real nature of Jiva is Brahman. What Jiva actually is Brahman. The snake is only a rope, but so long as we see it as a snake, it's frightening. We have to be very careful of it. So we're not talking about two different things. When we talk about the snake and the rope, we're not talking about two different things. So likewise, when we're talking about ego and Atma-sorūpa, or ego and Brahman, we're not talking about two things. They're actually one and the same thing. But when we're talking about ego, we're talking about what we seem to be. When we're talking about Brahman, we're talking about what we actually are. But ellām śiva-svarūpam, Bhagavan says. Everything is only that. But in another place, in verse 26 of Upadeshundya, Bhagavan says, ahandaya yavamam, the ego alone is everything. So some places Bhagavan says everything is Brahman, some places he says everything is ego. There's a reason It's important to understand that everything is Brahman, but in what sense is everything Brahman? Everything is ego, ego is Brahman. So we have to return to Brahman. The only gateway to Brahman is through ego. In other words, it's only by turning our attention back to ourselves, the one who now seems to be this ego, the one who seems to be Michael or seems to be Guru Das. Who is that I who now says I am? Guru Das is not the ego. The ego is the I that says I am Guru Das. So who is that I? If you turn your attention back to that I, when you discover the real nature of I, the real nature of oneself, Atma-sorūpa, that is Brahman. So as Guru Das, you are not Brahman. But as you actually are, you are Brahman. So when it is said Jiva Brahma Aikya, it's not saying Jiva as Jiva is Brahman, but Jiva as it really is Brahman, as it actually is. That means we are not actually Jiva. Jiva is what we seem to be. We are not actually that. We are Brahman. That is what we actually are. But it's all one self. There aren't many selves. We don't have a big self with a capital S and a small self with a little higher self and a lower self. People use these terms, but these are actually misleading terms. But it's only one self. But what we seem to be now, when we seem to be a person, the I that seems to be a person is ego. It's not Brahman who says I am Guru Das or I am Michael. It is ego that says I am Brahman or I am Guru Das or I am Michael. But if that I that now says I am Michael turns its attention back and leaves Michael aside and turns its attention back within to say, who actually am I? Then it will see itself as Brahman. And then it will see it never rose as ego. There was never any Michael or Guru Das or world or God or anything. There was always only what actually exists, Atma-sorūpa, which is Brahman.
I think the confusion arises because the term Atman is used in different senses.
But it's not because of the term. The confusion arises because we, Atman, now mistake ourselves to be Michael or Guru Das. So we can't blame, it's not the confusion is not caused by the words, the confusion is caused by our rising as ego. That is the root of the confusion. There will always be confusion so long as we rise as ego. And words, all these words we use, Bhagavan has explained these things, it's been explained in Upanishads, it's been explained in Shankara's commentaries, so many explanations are there. But some explanations get us closer to it, but no explanation, even what Bhagavan has taught us in uḷḷadu, which is the ultimate, but can be said in words, even that is only pointers. Because the truth is beyond thought, beyond words. Words are there to express ideas. But that which is beyond ideas cannot be expressed in words. That's why it's said it's ineffable, and anivachanīya. It cannot be expressed in words. But the words can point us in the right direction. What all the Upanishads, all Advaita philosophy, all of Bhagavan's teaching, what are they pointing at? They're pointing at one thing: you. Who are you? Who am I? So that is what we need to investigate. Words, different. The same word has different connotations in different contexts. So we have to understand from the context what the word means. We can't give a rigid definition and say, oh, this term always means this. When we talk about ourselves, are we talking about, when I say myself, I can be referring to Michael, I can be referring to my real nature. The same term, it has different meanings according to the context in which I'm using it.
Good heavens, you stopped. 5 minutes.
We all have to stop sometime. That's what we're here for, learning how to stop. I just wanted to clarify a bit more about what I was saying earlier about oneself or Atman not being a thing. It is not a thing in the sense that, as I said, a thing in itself are not two different things. A table in itself are not two different things. I and myself are not two different things. It is also not a thing. I mean, our real nature is also not a thing in the sense of being one thing among many. It is a thing in the sense that it is the only thing that actually exists. So it's not the word thing I'm getting. I'm talking about. It's about when I say about talking about the self is reifying it. It makes it seem to be something other than what we actually are. For example, if in a court case, if I was involved in a car accident, which was my fault, and I was in a court, and if I said, well, the self wasn't thinking at that time, so it drove across the red light, it sounds like I'm talking about something other than myself. But if I said I wasn't thinking, so I drove across the red light, obviously it's my fault. So when we talk about the self, the term the self, by adding the definite article before it, or even if we talk about self, in English we don't actually naturally talk about self. It's very abstract to talk about self. We normally talk about itself, himself, herself, oneself. Self is part of a compound word, and as a compound, it's clear that oneself is the same as one. Itself is the same as it. Herself is the same as her. It's not making a distinction, but as soon as we separate, in English, when we separate self from the other pronoun which is merged, naturally merged with it, it makes it seem to be something separate. It's in that sense that I'm saying self isn't a thing, in the sense that it's not a separate thing. So using this term, the self, subtly implies meanings that are not intended. And I think it potentially gives room for a lot of confusion or a lot of lack of clarity of understanding. Particularly the Tamil term Tān means only oneself, in the sense that Bhagavan uses it. The Atman, in the context in which it's used in a philosophical sense or spiritual sense, also means oneself. It's referring to oneself. It's I myself am Atman. Atman isn't something other than what I am. I don't.
Oneself.
Oneself, yes.
Oneself.
Yeah, oneself. It's a compound word. Yeah. Yes. Well, that's coincidence of the English usage, yes, but it is true. There is only oneself.
Michael, if you did actually make that answer in a court of law.
Yes.
Who crossed the road against the red lights?
Yes.
And you say, I did, my lord.
Yes.
But that's strictly not true either, is it? I mean, the truth would be the self did, God did.
No, we can't put the blame on God for what. If we're careless, we can't put the blame on God. We have to accept culpability. But I'm not talking about culpability. I use that as an example to say that when we say the self, we seem to be referring to something other than ourself.
Yes, I do understand.
Yeah, that's the point I'm making. So actually, this usage of the term the self in English tends to reify the concept. Reify means make an object of it, make it something, make it a thing, a separate thing.
Yes, I understand what you're getting at.
But even, this is a particular confusion in English and probably in other European languages, because in all European languages we have definite articles, whereas in Indian languages you don't have definite articles. So it's particularly confusing, but even I think this tendency to reify the concept of Atman is a it's an ancient tendency in Indian philosophy, which is why which gave scope for this dispute between Buddhism and Vedanta about whether there is a self or not. Because that can be an issue only if the self is something other than ourself.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody says I don't exist. It would be, I mean, no one can deny their own existence. We may not be what we seem to be, so we can deny the existence of the ego because the ego is what we seem to be, but we can't deny the existence of ourself.
No, I suppose not.
But it's not. But the Buddhists weren't the only ones who made that mistake, reifying it, because it's because of the tendency within Indian philosophy in general to reify, and it happens in Western philosophy. In Western philosophy, they also talk about the self. They don't put a capital S usually, but I mean, when they're talking about personal identity, they talk about the self.
When you use the word reify, you mean objectify?
Well, objectify means to make an object. Reify means to make a thing. But I mean, in this context, it amounts to more or less the same thing. That when I say reify, it's not a separate thing. I and myself are not two.
Re is thing in Latin.
It's a thing in that raise, I think is, but yeah.
It's a very apt legal phrase, res ipsa loquitur. The facts speak for themselves.
Yes, yes.
The self speaks for itself.
Yes, yes.
So, Michael, I think the point here is that when we say self in English, we mean with the associate with the when we mean self, we associate with the physical body of the self, whereas the Atma in Indian philosophy, the self is non-physical. It's not physical body you mean, but it's the Atma, the self, the śiva-svarūpa, which you say is, that is what it means that by self, not the physical body of the self.
No, but I mean, yes, but I think that is not the point. It's not about whether it's the body or not, because I mean that's a philosophical question. Whether we are body or not is a philosophical question which is addressed in Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy. Obviously, it's a basic question of philosophy: is whether I am a body or not. That is a basic question. But the term self, whether that. The problem is even in Indian philosophy, we tend to think of, when we use the term Atman, another confusion in Indian philosophy, another confusion with the word Atman, though Atman is a non-gender specific term, it refers to both the male and female, the noun Atman is treated as a male noun, as a masculine noun. So the pronoun referring to Atman is not it, but he. So in many Upanishads, they refer to Atman as he, which again is making a separation. What I'm saying is, there's always a problem. No language can express this perfectly. But language is always a problem because language is there to express thoughts, feelings, phenomena. We talk about things, but when we try to use language to talk about this subject, this is a very, very subtle subject which words cannot adequately convey. So we have to see beyond the words, but often the words But I mean, we have to use words in order to communicate. But when we use words, the words often give scope for misunderstanding. And this term Atman has given room for huge understanding in Indian philosophy, which is why there's been so much argument. Why for thousands of years Buddhists and Vedantins, or particularly Buddhists and Advaitins, were arguing about this, whether there's a self or not. There shouldn't be such an argument. Because it's only when you separate Atman as if it's something other than oneself, but there's any scope for such an argument.
But that is Dvaita, that's a dualism.
Yeah, but language is dualism. Bhagavan wrote a verse, I think he actually translated it from Sanskrit, but it is questions and answers are possible only in this language of Advaita. In Advaita, there's no scope for them, because language is duality, but we're trying to use this dual language to talk about something non-dual. So that's why we have to be very, very. It's not just, like in Western philosophy; they always insist you should define your terms, but it's not even a matter of defining the terms, because once you we're using, no words can convey what we're wanting to do, so we have to have a subtle understanding. We have to see behind the words to understand what they're referring to. But most of us unless we've gone very, very deep into the spiritual path, turning our mind within, our intellect is relatively gross. So we give a gross meaning to words. That's why, to really understand Bhagavan's teachings, merely reading Bhagavan's teachings isn't enough to understand them properly. We have to put them into practice. The more we put them into practice, the more our mind is purified and made subtle and refined, the more depth of understanding and clarity of understanding there will be. In uḷḷadu, Bhagavan uses two terms when he's talking about what is required for Atma-vichara. In one he says, nūn by a subtle intellect. Another one he says, kūnda by a sharp intellect, a pointed intellect. So our understanding needs to become very deep, subtle and refined. And in order to do that, I mean, that comes with practice. But as we go deeper into the practice, we understand the limitations of words more, but we also understand what is being pointed at by the words. So it's not a problem in Sanskrit. I mean, in English we've got a particular problem because we happen to have capital and lowercase, and we happen to have a definite article. So when we talk about the self, as soon as we use a definite article, we are creating a separation. That is compounded when we choose to use a capital S for when we're referring to the real self. In Tamil or Sanskrit, it's much simpler. You can simply say ātma-sorūpa as Bhagavan did. Ātma-sorūpa clearly means the real nature of oneself. There's no confusion there. Confusion only if you take Atman to be something other than yourself. But if you understand Atman means oneself, ātma-sorūpa therefore means the real nature of oneself, what we actually are. And it may seem I'm splitting hairs or I'm talking just about words, but there's a reason for talking about this, because it's words we understand through words. Words are a vehicle not only for communication but also for thinking. So we have to clarify our thinking. So we have to understand what the words are pointing at, and any words can give room for, in any language, can give room for misunderstanding. So in the spiritual path, Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, why have these three emphasized so much? First we have if we'd never heard of Bhagavan's teachings, we'd never heard of Upanishads, we'd never heard of any of his philosophy, we wouldn't even understand, we wouldn't even have begun to understand. But though we seem to be the body is not what we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves. We need some basic information to be given. That's the Sravana. then we need to understand that. There are so many things written in Bhagavad Gita, in Upanishads, in Brahma Sutras, Bhagavan teaching, there's uḷḷadu, there's also Nāṉ Ār, there's also talks, there's day by day, all these, so many different sources. There's so many, and all these books, the sages whose words these are recording are talking at different levels to different people. So we've got to see behind the words, understand at what level they're talking in different contexts. And we need to get a coherent understanding. Coherent means it's all holding together. There's no contradiction between one part or another. So we have to get a coherent understanding. So we need to do deep manana. We need to understand the connections. We need to understand each thing in perspective, where it all fits in. And where it's talking at a higher level, where it's talking at a lower level. All these we need to, that's understood by manana. But in order to do deep manana, we've got to have a deep clarity. And that deep clarity comes from practice, from nididhyasana. So as we go deeper into the practice, our manana becomes deeper, and then when we go back to the sravana, to reading the same text, uḷḷadu, I've been studying uḷḷadu now for more than 40 years, but I'm still seeing more and more depth of meaning in it than I saw even a year ago or 2 years ago. And so also with all of Bhagavan's works. So it's these three things, Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, it's an iterative process. It has to go on and on in order to refine our understanding. And ultimately, our aim is not to understand, because understanding is a function of the intellect. Our aim is to know what we ourselves actually are. But in order to know what we actually are, our understanding, we need to understand, when we're practicing Atma-vichara, we're trying to distinguish the chit from the jada. We're trying to distinguish the subject from the object. We're trying to distinguish the pure awareness from the awareness of phenomena. So that's why it's called drisya viveka. It's a process of, viveka means distinguishing. It's a process of distinguishing. So we need to have a very sharp and subtle intellect for this. That sharp and subtle intellect is gained through this repeated sravana, manana, and nididhyasana. Most important of all, nididhyasana. Second most important is manana. But sravana, we don't read Bhagavan's teachings once and then leave them aside and begin to practice Atma-vichara. We practice Atma-vichara, we have some difficulty, we go back to Bhagavan's teachings to see whether we can get more guidance. And so the three go on constantly as an iterative process. As our understanding becomes more and more refined, our intellect becomes more and more subtle, our power of attention becomes more and more keen, more and more kunda, sharp, and our love to know ourselves increases. And thus we go deeper and deeper into ourselves. But ultimately, what we end up with is not understanding, but in the eradication of the I that rises to understand anything. Because there's nothing to understand. What actually exists is only ātma-sorūpa. There's nothing more than that. So that doesn't entail understanding. That entails clarity of self-awareness. That is our ultimate goal.
So can I say that when the mind is completely still and into the Atma or self, whatever you call, then there is continuous Atma-vichara that happens? And to make the mind still, maybe I can give an analogy what I understand. I read from Annamalai Swami, one of that quotes, I think. He says the mind is like a wood. The more you keep practice, it becomes dry and then it burns. The moment you are into materialistic world, it becomes wet. The wet wood cannot go into Atma-vichara. Again, you have to make it dry, and then it can burn. Yes. So if that is what we need to practice, then we need to practice in day-to-day life, possibly that how to get rid of all the materialistic thoughts that come in, which are driven by possession, and possessions are driven by desires, or desires come out of the possession.
The problem is not the thoughts, it's the desire. Because Bhagavan says in Nāṉ Ār, what's it matter however many thoughts arise? The problem is our liking to go after those thoughts. All these phenomena appear. Bhagavan says in verse 6 of Arunachashtakam, Bhagavan ends by saying, Nindrida Sendrida Ninevida Vindre. Let them appear or let them not appear. Let them come or let them go. What does it matter? None of them are other than you. So if we are so keen on attending to ourselves, it doesn't matter whether other things appear or not, because when we're attending to ourselves, we're not looking at them to see whether they've appeared or not. That's the meaning of it. So it's not thoughts of the problem. The problem is our vasanas, our liking to go after those thoughts, our liking to experience all these wonderful vishayas. See, the world is full of so many wonderful things, so many things we can experience, so many things we can learn, wonderful things are there in the world. So long as we've got that taste to go out into this world, that is what is preventing us from going within. So it's the liking to go outwards is the problem. So it's at a very, very subtle level the mind is to be rectified. So it's this rectification. What is required is chitta suddhi. Usually chitta suddhi we say purity of mind. But what chitta actually means, the chittam, is the will. It's the will element of the mind. In manas, buddhi, chittam, ahankaram. Manas is the gross, they're all actually the same thing, but the grossest aspect is the mind, the thoughts. The intellect is what distinguishes. But what more important than the intellect is the chittam. Because take philosophers, for example. Many brilliant philosophers are there in the world. Do they all agree? Each one argues for a different thing. Why? Because they each like to believe different things. Philosophers don't believe, it's not because of philosophers are human beings. Every human being has their own likes and dislikes. So we all like to believe certain things, and we like to justify what we believe. So we find all the faults with other people's beliefs, but we don't want to find fault with our belief. We try to find justification for our belief. That's what philosophy is all about. So ultimately, it's not the intellect which is operating in philosophy, it's the chittam, it's the will. And the will is operating in every aspect of our life. So the problem lies in the chittam. It's the chittam, what is the impurity in the chittam? It's our vishaya vasanas, our liking to go outward. That is what needs to be purified. So we need to get rid of that liking to go outward. That's where the problem lies. That's why, what's the difference between karmiya karma and nishkarmiya karma? The actions are the same. If the will behind it is different. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa worshipped Kali. So many people have worshipped Kali. What's special about his worship of Kali? Other people worship Kali because they want to pass an exam or get a promotion or earn more money or buy a new Ferrari or buy a better house or something. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, why he worshipped Kali? Because he prayed only for love. So the actions are the same, but love behind it is different. That is the chitta, that is the will aspect. So it's the will, that is why Bhagavan said bhakti is the mother of jnana. Bhakti is the love for that. That's an aspect of the will. So it's all a matter of what do we want. Why it seems difficult? Because we don't yet want it enough. To say the same thing in a different way, we want other things too much. We want other things more than we want this. So it's all a matter of rectifying our will. Our will is what determines the choices we make. So the basic choice we have at every moment is, do we attend to phenomena, or do we attend to ourselves, the one who is aware of phenomena? That's why the Bible says, to whom? To whom is this thought? To whom does this... So Bhagavan constantly trying to turn our attention back towards ourselves. But though he's given us that instructions, it's up to us. Do we choose to follow what he said, turn our attention to ourselves, or choose to face outwards?
Now, that is where do you think surrender comes to the play? Because any such will that happens, you surrender to Bhagavan, then that will becomes weaker and you can turn internally inward rather than fighting with the will, right?
Ninishtam enishtam, Bhagavan says, your will is my will. We have to give our will to him. That is, we have to have no will of our own. Our will is what is driving us to go outward. We have to surrender that will. And when the will of the ego is surrendered, what remains, the will that then remain, is the love which is our real nature, which is love for ourselves. So yes, but the path of self-surrender begins with trying to surrender our will, trying to give up our desires, lessen our desires. But surrender can be complete only when we give up our desires entirely. And we can give up our desires entirely only when we give up the one who has desires, namely the ego. So that's why it's called ātma-sarūpam. It's the Atma. Atma there doesn't mean Brahman. Atma means, that's a very good example. Ātma-sarūpam, the Atma in ātma-sarūpam is not our real nature, but we have surrendered. It's the ego, what we seem to be. That is what we have to surrender. But in order to surrender the ego, we have to surrender its will. And in order to surrender its will completely, we have to surrender the ego. So it's all, everything is connected.
No, absolutely. See, you are absolutely right. I think the question is that do you reach surrender at a desireless stage, or you become desireless because you have surrendered?
Yes. Surrender is a process. It begins with surrendering little by little, giving up our likes and dislikes. But ultimately, the surrender becomes complete only by surrendering the ego. That's why Bhagavan says, Ānma chintane tavira, vera chintane kalambavadaku, satram idam kodamo, Atma-nishta paranai irapade, tannai īśvaraṇ alipadam. That is, giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought except Atma-chintana. Atma-chintana literally means thought of oneself or thinking of oneself. In effect, it means self-attentiveness. So attending to nothing other than oneself is what that implies. Giving no room to the rising of any thought other than Atma-chintana implies attending to nothing other than oneself, and thereby being Atma-nishta param, means one who is firmly fixed in oneself, that is the attention firmly fixed in oneself. Tannai īśvaraṇ alipadam, that is giving oneself to God. So we can give up this ego only by turning our attention within. But even before we turn our attention within, even when we're engaged in the activities of the world, we can be choosing not to feed our likes and dislikes, to develop an attitude of surrender, an attitude of yielding everything to God, an attitude of vairagya, not caring about what does it matter if I have a little bit more money or a little bit less money. I'm not going to take it with me anyway. It's not going to last me very long. So our mind goes out, money, I just used an example. There's so many things our mind goes out for. But whatever we seek to achieve in this life, how long is it going to last? This body itself is going to last only a few more years. So what's the use of all these achievements? We may achieve wealth, we may achieve social status, we may achieve name and fame, so many things we may achieve in this world. But how long is it? It's not going to nothing is going to come with us. The only thing that will come with us is our love for Bhagavan, our love for following what Bhagavan has taught us. So that is what we need to cultivate.
Thank you.
Michael, when you use the word chitam, that is different from the word chit.
Yes. Chit means awareness.
Yes, consciousness.
Chitam means will. It's the will aspect of the mind.
Sankalpa, does that mean something?
Sankalpa means desires or volitions or It's all connected with will. Vasanas also, they're elements. You can say sankalpas or vasanas, they're elements of the will.
So chitta means what exactly?
It means the will. Will. And sometimes the chittam is described as the storehouse of vasanas. It's not literally a store. All the vasanas together, the totality of all vasanas is chittam. Because vasanas are nothing but different elements of our will. Because we don't want, if we wanted one thing, there'd only be one element of our will, but we want many things. So that's why ekagra, coming to one-pointedness, is necessary. That's how this bhakti marga, I'm talking about the bhakti marga where we're worshipping God as other than ourselves, that is bringing the mind to one point, desiring nothing but God himself. That purifies the mind because we're giving up other desires. And when the mind is sufficiently purified, then God will appear to us as Guru and say, I am not outside, I am within you, I am what is shining in you. To know me, know yourself. Then we turn our attention within.
Right. Okay, yes, good, thank you.
Yeah.
Got that.
What does Bhagavan say about will? What is will as such?
Will is the totality of all our likes, dislikes, desires, fears, hopes, attachments. I mean, these are all different elements of our will. But the will is, ultimately, will is the driving force. What we are all seeking, ultimately, we're all seeking happiness. We all want to be happy, don't we? The driving force behind all our actions is the desire to be happy. But because of our aviveka, our lack of discrimination, we believe we get happiness if we can clear our debt or pay off our mortgage or get a better job, or if our friends are nicer to us, if we don't have this problem or that problem, if our health is better. We think our happiness depends on these external things. Why? Because we've got desire for these external things. When we achieve them, that desire is, Bhagavan explains it very nicely in Nāṉ Ār. When we achieve the things we like, or we avoid the things we dislike, the mind at that moment subsides. Not totally, but at least to some extent, the agitation of the mind. If I desperately want to earn £1 million, and once I win a lottery of £1 million, I'm very happy. Why? Because all that desire for that £1 million, which was agitating my mind, is temporarily satisfied. So the mind calms down, and the happiness which is already within shines forth. So all the happiness that we associate with external things is within us. But Bhagavan gives a very nice analogy in Guru Vachaka Kavai. He says a foolish dog went to a cremation ground and found an old dry bone and started chewing on that bone. It's such an old bone, there's not any blood or juice or anything in it. But the dog is biting on it and it splinters. And it cuts wounds in the dog's mouth. And the dog drops the bone, sees the blood there, licks the blood and says, oh, such a tasty bone, and continues chewing on it. So also is our seeking happiness outside ourselves. All the happiness that we seem to get from outside is actually coming from within. But it's that desire for happiness is the driving force behind all actions.
So will is homing in on that sense of happiness?
Yes, happiness and love, one term that is often used is Satchitananda. An equivalent of Satchitananda, a parallel term, is Asti Bhati Priyam. Asti means being, the same as Sat. Bhati means shining, Chit, the awareness. Priyam means love. Because love is always for happiness. We all love to be happy. So it is the desire for happiness, the love for happiness, which is driving all our will. Ultimately comes down to that love for happiness. But because we of our lack of discrimination, we think if I get sick, that's going to be a calamity, so I have to avoid getting sick. I'll be unhappy if I'm sick. I'll be happy if I'm healthy. I'll be happy if I'm free of all my poverty. We associate happiness with these things. We think that these things will give us happiness. But if we develop vairagya, Bhagavan says, how we go deep within. He says, he gives the analogy of pearl diver diving in, tying a stone to his waist. Like that stone that the pearl diver uses, we need to tie the stone of vairagya. Vairagya means what? Freedom from desire. Raga is passion, desire. So that freedom from passion is what is required in order to go within. The passion arises, desire for other things arises because of our lack of viveka, because we think we get happiness from these things. And even though we read Bhagavan's teachings and we are convinced on the surface of our mind, but there's no happiness in these things, our actions show that we still aren't, our conviction is that it's still at a very superficial level. Deep down we still believe but our happiness depends on external things. So our mind is going outwards.
Actually, our nature is to find happiness. That's an inherent part of our nature.
Happiness is our nature. When we limit ourselves as ego, we separate ourselves from the fullness of happiness that we really are. So we, as an ego, we enjoy so many pleasures, but are we satisfied with anything? Bhagavan says in Guru Vachakavai, he says, the nature of desire, it'll make an atom into Mount Meru before it's desired, and it will make Mount Meru into an atom when it is desired, when it's achieved. So even the biggest thing becomes nothing. Are billionaires satisfied with their billions? No, they still want more. But for a poor person, even £100 is a big, seems to be a great thing. So it's the nature of desire. We always want more than we have. Because Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, a clear sign that a clear proof that we are Brahman is the fact that we are never satisfied. Because our real nature is Brahman, we cannot be satisfied with anything other than Brahman, anything other than the infinite whole, the absolute unlimited happiness, because that is our real nature. So all this trivial happiness we experience as an ego never satisfies us. So all actions, all endeavors, not only of human beings, but of every sentient being, is seeking a return to our real nature, which is happiness. So we're all seeking our real nature, but we're seeking it in the wrong place. That is why, as ego, we can never be free of desire. If we want to get rid of desire, we have to get rid of the ego. The ego is the root of the desire. Desire is the very nature of ego. Bhagavan says, Urupatri undam, Urupatri nekam, Urupatri undu mikongam. Like grasping form, it rises. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping form, it waxes and flourishes. Grasping, feeding on form. Grasping means attaching ourselves. That's a part of the will. That's a function of the will.
And the desire to want to be free of desire is a desire of itself.
It is, yes. But we can be free of that desire by getting rid of the one who has that desire.
I think we're talking about the perfect state of being here.
So the perfect state of being?
Yeah.
Because being is sat. Our nature is to be, and happiness is our nature, so they're one and the same thing.
I think we're talking about equilibrium.
Yes.
Where you are in perfection.
In perfection, yes.
That's it.
Yes, absolute perfection. But there's always imperfection if there's more than one.
Yeah, but I mean, this is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Perfection.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. Which is the state of absolute oneness. where
Yes.
we alone exist.
Which is what there is. That's
Yes,
it.
which it comes back to the first sentence of this paragraph we did today. Yathārtham-āy uḷḷadu ātma-sorūpam oṉṭṛē. What actually exists is only ātma-sorūpa. That is the one. That is, and that alone is the state of perfection where we are aware of ourselves as that which alone exists.
So just the perfect state of being, equilibrium, and that's what we're looking
Yeah,
for.
we can describe it in many words, but it's all, it comes back to the same thing.
Simple.
Simple, yes, very simple.
I may be getting confused. What is I?
In Tamil, it's Nāṉ Ār. In Sanskrit, it's aham. But both Tamil and Sanskrit, their languages, some languages, what are called zero copular languages. Copular means the verb is. Some languages, you don't need to express. If there's no other verb in a sentence, is implied. So, for example, Nāṉ Ār is I who. But what is implied is I am who. The am is implied there. So Nāṉ means I am I. Aham means I am I. Though am is not specified there, it's implied there. So in Tamil, if you want to say I am this, nānidu. You just say I this, because am is implied. So, but for some reason, I don't know, someone started translating, I mean, Bhagavan uses this term in many of his verses. He uses the term Nāṉ or aham. Someone, for some reason, decided to translate it as I-I, which God alone knows what that is meant to mean. In Tamil, it's so clear, Nāṉ means I am I. But it's, yes, but it's,
So I am that. Is that the same thing?
no, it's not, because Bhagavan said, I am this or I am that is ego. I cannot be anything other than myself. So the only our true identity, now our false identity, I am Michael. That is a false identity, because Michael is something that comes and goes. All the things that we identify ourselves with come and go. But our real identity is only I am I, because we can't be anything other than ourselves. So what Bhagavan is in, I mean, there are various reasons why Bhagavan used that, but one reason is Bhagavan is indicating the ultimate experience is not I am that, because there's no that other than I to be I am that. The best way of expressing the ultimate truth is I am I. That's why Bhagavan said, of all the Mahavakyas, greater than the Mahavakyas in the 4 Vedas, Aham Brahmasmi and all these things, I am Brahman, Tattvamasi, all these, the greatest Mahavakya of all, the one that expresses the truth best of all, is the Mahavakya that happens to be found in the Bible. I am that I am. Why Bhagavan often used to point out to that is because how Bhagavan interprets that is, God is saying, I am I. I am nothing other than I. And there is only, as he says here, that I, Atma-sorūpa, alone is what actually exists. So the I in God and the I in you and me is the same I. So know that I and you know everything. And what are you? You are just that I and nothing else. So I am I.
5 minutes silence now. We've overshot.